Hello friends, welcome to a new session on methodology of teaching natural science. History of science education. The history and nature of science and the relationship to science education are contested. Arthur Koestler, 1959, argues that until the 17th century, science is based around Aristotelian philosophy and logic. Since the 17th century, science had developed around the Newtonian model of empirical science. Despite Einstein and recent great scientists, Koestler argues that science is still essentially Newtonian. Science education is a field concerned and process with sharing of science content and process with individuals which were not traditionally considered as contingent to scientific community. The field of science education comprises of science content, some social science and some teaching pedagogy. Pedagogy is the science and art of education. Its aims range from full development of human beings to acquisition of skills. The word comes from pedagogia. Pedios means child and ego lead means to lead the child. History of science in ancient, medieval and modern times. The history of science is the study of the development of science and scientific knowledge, both natural and social sciences. In prehistoric times, knowledge was passed from generation to generation by oral tradition. Domestication of maize has been dated about 9,000 years ago in southern Mexico. Ancient period in the East Egyptian, Babylonian and Greco-Roman. The history of science starts at the Old Stone Age when man started using wood, bone and stone for making tools. In the New Stone Age, man started cultivation and turned from hunting to agriculture. During the Bronze Age, BC 3000 CE, copper smelting technology was invented. Iron smelting was done in Iran. Egyptians and Babylonians used empirical knowledge by 1200 BC. Egyptians built pyramids utilizing mathematical calculations and measurements. In Sumer, Iraq, around BC 3500, Mesopotamian people began to record observations of the world with numerical data. Ancient Egypt, BC 3150, made significant advances in astronomy, mathematics, medicine and geometry. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, BC 3150, is one of the first medical documents still existed and is the beginning of modern medicine. Babylonian, BC 1200, astronomy records the motion of planets and moon. The pre-Socratic philosopher Thales, 614 to 546 BC, postulates that land floats on water and earthquakes are caused by agitation of water upon which land floats rather than God production. Thales, student of Pythagoras, 570 to 495 BC, was the first to postulate that the earth is spherical and founded the Pythagorean school. Pythagoras, 570 to 495 BC, Ionian Greek philosopher and mathematician, formulated Pythagorean theorems. Plato, 427 to 347 and Aristotle, 384 to 322 BC, introduced the doctrine of reasoning. Plato's student Aristotle introduced empiricism. Universal truth can be arrived at observation and induction and laying foundation of scientific method. Archimedes, 287 to 212 BC, calculated the area of the arc of parabola. As a mathematician and engineer, he laid the foundation of hydrostatics and principle of lever. Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of earth. In medicine, Hippocrates, BC 460 to 370, and his followers were the first to describe many diseases and develop the oath of physicians. Hipparchus, 190 to 120 BC, produced star catalogue. Galen, AD 129 to 200, performed many operations including brain and eye surgery. Euclid in AD 100 introduced the concept of definition, axiom, theorem and proof through his book Elements is still in use. From ancient Greek philosophers to medieval Muslim philosophers and scientists to European Renaissance and Enlightenment to secular sciences of modern day enquiry began with Socratic method. After the division of Roman Empire in the Middle East, Greek philosophy was supported by the Arab Empire. Theophrastus 371 to 287 BC described some plants and animals and established first taxonomy. Pliny the Elder produced the first encyclopedia of the natural world in 77 AD. He describes the diamond, crystals and amber. Ptolemy AD 90 to 168 consolidated the Greek astronomical theory. Euclid AD 100 laid down the foundations of mathematical rigor and introduced mathematical theorems and proofs which are still in use. Leucippus 5th century introduced the atom theory that all matter is made up of atoms. Medieval period. The Byzantine Empire 500 to 1453 AD had learning centers such as Constantinople. Europe's knowledge production was concentrated in the medieval monasteries during the 12th and 13th centuries. With the spread of Islam in the 7th and 8th centuries, a period of Islamic scholarship known as the Islamic Golden Age lasted until the 13th century. Muslim scientists laid greater emphasis on scientific method. Scientific progress in methodology was starting with Al-Hasan in 1000 AD in his book Optics, and he was considered as father of optics. Persian Sabian mathematician Al-Batini 850 to 929 AD contributed to astronomy and mathematics. Muslim chemist and alchemist contributed to chemistry. Jabir ibn Haynas considered as father of chemistry. Avicenna ibn Sina 1980 to 1030 AD is a polymath philosopher, pioneered experimental medicine, and his notable works are Book of Healing and the Canon of Medicine. The works of Arabic scientists was influenced by Roger Bacon, who introduced empirical method to Europe, and later Isaac Newton. Some other famous scientists from Islamic world include Al-Farabi, polymath, Abu al-Qasim Sarawi, pioneer of surgery. In Europe, the beginning of the 13th century found the transfer of scientific ideas through monasteries and universities. Scholars such as Roger Bacon 1214 to 1294, Albertus Magnus are the precursors of modern scientific method. In the first half of the 14th century, William of Ockham 1287 to 1347, philosopher, introduced parsimony. Jean Buridan developed the theory of impetus, the first step in modern inertia. Modern period. The scientific evolution began in 1543 in Europe. Copernicus 1473 to 1543 introduced a heliocentric view which held that the earth revolved around the sun, published his thesis De Revolutionibus, which held that the earth revolved around its own axis. Other scientists of the period were Galileo 1610 to 1613, Robert Hooke 1665, Pascal 1646, Francis Bacon 1561 to 1626, Thomas Brown 1605 to 1682, etc. They emphasized modern experimentation and reason over traditional considerations. Age of Enlightenment was a European affair during the 19th century based on the works of Newton and Pascal related to mathematics, physics and technology. Newton published Principia Mathematica in 1657 representative of the unprecedented scientific publication throughout Europe. Adam Smith and Voltaire were great economists and political scientists of the time. During 19th century, Darwin's theory of evolution was established. Faraday and Ohm described the behavior of electricity and magnetism during this century. The beginning of the 20th century started a revolution in science. Big Bang theory by George Lemaitre was established. Robert Boyle 1661 differentiated chemistry from alchemy. Lavoisier advocated the theory of conservation of mass. John Dalton 1803 described the properties of matter. Mendeleev 1871 composed the periodical table. Louis Pasteur produced vaccine against rabies and invented pasteurization. Laws of inheritance was formulated by Mendeleev 1866. In 1953, Watson and Crick produced structure of DNA. During the 19th century, practice of science became professionalized, institutionalized and continued through 20th century. Development of science and technology in ancient India. The earliest knowledge of mathematics appeared in Indus Valley 3800 to 2000 BC. They made bricks in the proportion of 4:2:1. They designed a ruler, Mohenjo-daro ruler, with a unit length of 1.32 inches or 3.4 centimeter. Indian astronomer and mathematician Aryabhatta 476 to 550 in his Aryabhatiya 499 introduced in trigonometric functions, trigonometric tables and algorithms of algebra. In AD 628, Brahmagupta suggested that gravity was the force of attractions. He explained the theme of zero as placeholder and decimal digit. During the 14th and 16th centuries, Kerala School of Astronomy and Mathematics made advances in astronomy, trigonometry and analysis. In particular, Madhava of Sangamagrama is considered the founder of mathematical analysis. In Rigveda finds speculations about the genesis of the universe, the spherical self-supporting earth and the 360-day year, months of 12 equal parts consisting of 30 days. In Siddhanta Shiromani, written by Bhaskara in the 12th century, cover topics such as mean longitudes of planets, lunar eclipse, solar eclipse, latitudes of planets, rising and setting the moons, crust and parts of the sun. Linguistic activities can be seen in the Iron Age India, 1st millennium BC, with analysis of Sanskrit for recitation and interpretation of Vedic text. The most notable grammarian Panini 520 to 460 BC formulated 4000 rules. Ayurveda, a traditional system of medicine, originated before 2500 BC. Crucible and stainless steel were invented in the Indus Valley civilization 3800 to 2000 BC. Philosophy of science. Philosophy of science is a branch of philosophy concerned with the foundations, methods and implications of science. The central question concerns what counts as science, the reliability of scientific theories and the purpose of science. This discipline overlaps with metaphysics, ontology and epistemology. For example, it explores the relationship with science and truth. Philosophy of science emerged as a distinct discipline in the middle of the 20th century in the wake of logical positivism. Philosophy of the particular sciences ranges from questions about the nature of time raised by Einstein's general relativity to the implication of economics for the public policy. A central theme is whether a scientific discipline can be reduced to forms of another. That is, chemistry can be reduced to physics, or can sociology be reduced to individual psychology? The general questions of the philosophy of science arise with greater specificity in the particular sciences. For instance, the question of validity of scientific reasoning is seen in a different guise in foundation of statistics. Philosophies of biology, psychology and sociology and social sciences explore whether the scientific study of human nature can achieve objectivity or is inevitably shaped in values and social relations. Karl Popper 1902 to 1994 argued that scientific knowledge is progressive and cumulative. Thomas Kuhn 1922 to 1996 said that scientific knowledge moved through paradigm shift. Philosophy of science embraces within itself the scientific method. This was so all the scientists were philosophers and most of the philosophers were scientists. Both of them investigated and reflected upon the methods of acquiring knowledge which were inspired more philosophically than scientifically. Philosophy of science has shown three different areas of interest, namely definition and redefinition of concepts, formulating problems more productively, including problem areas with a view to attack problems more scientifically and fruitfully. Investigation of assumptions underlying the nature of reality. Philosophers speculate on the entire field. Scientist tends to remain very close to reality and therefore does not attempt to pose impossible problems to himself which cannot answer. History of science education. Science education started in ancient Babylonia, China, Persia and India. The origins of science trace back to Plato and Aristotle, who distinguished the forms of approximate and exact reasoning, set out the three forms of adductive, deductive and inductive inferences, and also analyzed reasoning by analogy. The 11th century Arab polymath Ibn al-Hayth, known in Greek as Al-Hasan, conducted his researches in optics by way of controlled experimental testing and was guided in this by geometrical studies. Roger Bacon 1214 to 1294, an English thinker and experimenter, is recognized by many to be the father of modern scientific method. His view that mathematics was essential to a correct understanding of natural philosophy was considered to be 400 years ahead of his time. In the modern period, Francis Bacon was the seminal figure at the time of scientific revolution. In his work Novum Organum 1620, a reference to Aristotle's organum, Bacon outlined a new system of logic to improve upon the old philosophical processor's syllogisms. In 1639, René Descartes established a new framework for scientific method, Discourse on Method, advocating rationalism. The writings of Al-Hasan, Bacon and Descartes are considered critical in the historical development of scientific method, as are those of John Stuart Mill. David Hume expressed skepticism about the ability of science to determine causality and gave a definitive for formulation of problem of induction. Science education is not a separate and detachable unit of secondary education. Its growth has to be seen in the content of the past historical events. Science teaching in India is several decades old, and of course it started on a very slow foot. The reviews issued by the Government of India in the year 1887 to 92 deplorably reflected the shocking state of affairs in science teaching of that period. Even up to the beginning of 20th century, there was considerable shortage of qualified science teachers. After the visit of Professor Armstrong from 1905 to 1917, there was little improvement in the expansion of science education. Then the First World War intervened, which consequently interrupted this expansion. There, however, occurred considerable expansion in secondary education both in the rural and urban areas after the recommendations of the Calcutta University Commission, when intermediate colleges in arts, science, medicine, etc. were set up. Since then, the expenditure on the expansion of science education has been on the increase. In the past, science meant only physics and chemistry. There was very little of biology teaching in schools. After the recommendations of the Secondary Education Commission, opportunities for biology education became increasingly available in the newly opened multipurpose schools. Aristotle's teachings and writings greatly influenced all branches of human knowledge and culture. It was through him that science for the first time received some systematic and organized treatment. In the 16th century, Francis Bacon brought the concept of inductive enquiry to the world. He proposed science training as part of education, and a real start in science teaching was made through the inductive method. Comenius emphasized the importance of objects and pictures in teaching. During 17th century, various scientific academies were established, and there was a great change in the outlook towards life and learning. The Industrial Revolution in 18th century brought science closer and closer to the common man. The establishment of mechanical institute and night schools during the century, science gained a place in the school curriculum by its introduction for the first time at Roorkee School of England in 1849. The most outstanding contribution to the teaching of science towards the close of 19th century was that of H.E. Armstrong. He proposed the heuristic method of teaching science. In the beginning of the 20th century, there has been adequate improvement in the equipment and facilities for science teaching in schools. In 1916, the British government appointed a committee under the chairmanship of Sir J.J. Thomson to inquire into the position of natural science in the educational system, and its report published under the title Natural Science in Education. The 20th century is the age of rapid propagation of science education all over the world, which provides modern science curriculum, methods and techniques of teaching science. And today, the 21st century, there has been a tremendous increase in the science and technology and technological devices to teach science. That is, the science education today is much more advanced with pace of the age. Development of science education in modern India. Science education in India today has been greatly developed due to the influence of science and technology. The important landmarks are: 1. Establishment of the Royal Society in 1664. 2. Establishment of the first medical college, Calcutta Medical College, established in 1835. 3. The first research institution in science in 1876, the Indian Association for the Cultivation of Science, was founded. 4. Establishment of the first University College of Science. 5. Report of the Secondary Education Commission 1953, which recommended the teaching of general science as a compulsory subject in high schools and higher secondary schools. 6. All India Seminar on Teaching Science 1956. 7. National Science Policy Resolution 1957. 8. Indian Parliamentary and Scientific Committee. 9. National Council of Educational Research and Training. 10. UNESCO. 11. Indian Education Commission 1964 to 66. 12. National Policy on Education 1986. Indian scientists who contributed to modern science. The names of some such individuals who could be spotted out in the scenario of the scientific pursuit of India as a nation are listed in chronological order according to the year of the birth. 1. J.C. Bose, 1858, Research on Plants and Animals. 2. P.C. Rai, 1861, Chemistry. 3. C.V. Raman, 1888, Raman Effect. 4. Meghnath Shah, 1893, Ionization Formula. 5. Satyendra Nath Bose, 1894. 6. Salim Ali, 1896, Bird Watcher. D.S. Kothari, 1906. Benjamin Pierre Paul, 1906, Wheat Breeding. Homi Jahangir Baba, 1909, Atomic Research. S. Chandrasekhar, 1910, Astrophysics. Kurian Varghese, 1921, Operation Flood and White Revolution. Hargobind Khorana, 1922, Genetics. M.S. Vishwanathan, 1925, Agricultural Scientist. Raja Ramanna, 1925, Nuclear Physics. E.C. George Sudarshan, 1931. P.K. Iyengar, 1931, Nuclear Physics. A.P.J. Abdul Kalam, Rocket Technology, 1931. George Joseph, 1938, Satellite Technology. R.N. Agarwal, 1941, Rocket Technology. Modern science is a well established but complicated topic because there are cross-border multinational research in scientific cooperative endeavor which are financed by plurality of governments and multinational corporations, so that individuals recedes to the background to a large extent. Even then, the individual contributions remain unique and could be identified for separate use. Now, let us summarize what we have learned in this session. History of science in ancient, medieval and modern times is a description of what happened in the field of science education. Development of science and technology in ancient India in the field of science and its instructional objectives have been ever present in India. The specific of the science education is highlighted. Philosophy of science is a special branch of study which has been an area of special attention to scientists and social scientists alike. Some important aspects of philosophy of science is attempted. The history of science and science education bring us to the high epistemological and ontological realms of human existence. Here we attempt to show how importantly the development of science and science education are integrated to human progress. India emerged as a modern nation only after the threw away the British colonial yoke. But the Indian society from the ancient times has been a scientific society. But the Western scientific pursuit was brought to India and modern scientific thinking was the product of British colonial rule. Various aspects of those attempts are brought out for general interest. Now, there are few assignments for workout. List out some of the landmarks in the history of science in modern period. Explain the development of science in ancient India. What is philosophy of science? Explain the development of science in medieval India. Now, I can suggest some books for your reference. 1. The Impact of Science Teaching by Vaidya Narendra, published by Oxford and IBH Publishing Co., 1971. Teaching Science in Secondary Schools by Renner W. John and Stafford G. Don, published by New York Harper and Row Publishers in 1972. Taxonomy of Educational Objectives, Book 1, Cognitive Domain by Bloom S. Benjamin, published by Logman Inc. London in 1956. Science Education, Methodology of Teaching and Pedagogic Analysis by Shivarajan K. and Fasuluddin, published by Calicut University Press in 2008. Thank you very much for watching this session. Let's meet in another occasion with another topic. Thank you. Bye.